Hello and welcome to episode 16 of CPTSD with Pop Woodman. I'm Pop Woodman. Um, Today's episode is about imposter syndrome versus complex PTSD and the connection that the two have with one another. So we're going to be looking at that today as we go through our video. Now, if you look at this graphic here, which I got from Click2 Pro, both my graphics come from there on this video. Imposter syndrome versus CPTSD. Look at the symptoms that come with imposter syndrome. You're worried about perfectionism. You're a perfectionist, but you have self-doubt and you fear being found out as not being worthy of the position you might have or so on. Then you look at CPTSD over here. Emotional dysregulation, deep-seated low self-worth, and trauma flashbacks. There's a lot to unpack there, if you will, when you think about what all that means. But these are symptoms of imposter syndrome and complex PTSD. They kind of meet in the middle here. Low confidence, fear of failure, inability to accept success. Those of us with CPTSD have a tendency to not really believe in ourselves. We have low self-confidence, we have low self-worth, and we're, I guess you could almost say, afraid of success because we don't feel we're worthy of it for whatever reason. Mainly because of how we were treated growing up and so on. But moving on from that, with all these things going on, imposter syndrome is right there for us. Some of the symptoms of CPTSD are trying to be a perfectionist, trying to make sure everything's all right because you don't want to get in trouble for it being wrong or so on. But certainly self-doubt is a big part of it, and fear of being found out as one who is not really worthy of where we are in any given situation. So when you look at these two things side by side, boy, are they very similar, and certainly one thing can lead to the other, and there's certainly some serious middle ground there with low confidence, fear of failure, inability to accept success. All right, let's look at this a little bit deeper now. Some of the core fears of imposter syndrome and complex PTSD. Core fears. The fear of being exposed as a fraud despite evidence of success. It's a real thing. That people feel that they're gonna be discovered, that they're not all that they're supposed to be. Even though things are going well, things are successful, they're successful, there's always this fear of being exposed or being found out. Now, complex PTSD, some of the deep-seated fears there, or core fears, is fear of abandonment, rejection, or harm, and they're often rooted in past trauma. So past trauma has a huge effect on us throughout our lives, especially those of us who experienced a lot of it as children. Our way of seeing ourselves and seeing all situations is skewed because of CPTSD. Self-perception. Again, when it comes to imposter syndrome and complex PTSD, we have our own perceptions of ourselves. And the self-perception of someone with imposter syndrome is, I'm not good enough and I don't deserve success. Self-perceptions of CPTSD. I am unworthy to due to the past trauma. My pain defines me. So can you see how these overlap with each other? How they affect each other and how we could actually find ourselves in the middle there very easily. Some of the triggers of imposter syndrome. A high pressure situation, success, new responsibilities, praise or recognition. These things can trigger us to feel like we're an imposter in whatever situation we're in, whether it be a high pressure situation. Uh, we're all of a sudden we're experiencing success and we feel like, oh man, we're unworthy of this. The new responsibilities may seem just too overwhelming for us to bear. And just simply being praised for the work one does or being recognized for it can trigger imposter syndrome. What are the triggers for CPTSD? Childhood trauma, abuse, neglect, emotional invalidation, and long-term stress. These are the triggers that bring us back to that middle ground there. We remember the trauma, we remember the abuse, the neglect, and being emotionally invalidated. This long-term stress wears on someone with PTSD and certainly affects how we cope with high-pressure situations, success, new responsibilities, praise, and recognition. It's lurking in the background. What are the coping mechanisms of someone with imposter syndrome and someone with CPTSD? Well, imposter syndrome, the coping mechanisms are overworking, perfectionism, procrastination, self-sabotage. These are how one copes with imposter syndrome. They realize these things about themselves. I've got to work hard. If I want to be worthy of the position I'm in, the situation I'm in, I've got to work hard, harder than everybody else, and it has to be perfect. But then procrastination comes in because we're afraid of acting, because we might be found out as we're not as good as we may appear on the surface. And self-sabotage. Yeah, that's something that is really destructive, but for fear of being found out, we may sabotage ourselves, and that creates its own set of issues for sure. Now, coping mechanisms for somebody with CPTSD: emotional numbing, self-isolation, disassociation, fear, and trust. These are the things that people with CPTSD do to cope with life. Just go numb. Self-isolate. Find yourself alone and away from everybody else to protect yourself. You disassociate. You have fear and trust issues. A lot of stuff going on, for sure. So what are the impacts on life of someone with imposter syndrome or complex PTSD? Well, imposter syndrome, the impact is anxiety, stress, career stagnation, inability to enjoy success. For fear of being found out, there's always that anxiety, that worry, and the stress, and that your career is just going to stay in one place and not go anywhere. You're going to be found out and maybe not even have this career anymore. And because you're going through all this anxiety and stress and everything, you lose the ability to enjoy the success. You just can't enjoy it for fear of it's temporary. It's going to go away. It'll all disappear someday when somebody finds out who you really are. PTSD symptoms that impact our lives, every aspect of our lives. Relationship struggles, emotional dysregulation, and chronic low self-worth. The low self-worth of CPTSD can actually become self-loathing. You can't even stand yourself. And feeling that way about yourself, you definitely feel as though you're an imposter and you're in a place you shouldn't be because you're not worthy of it. So how does imposter syndrome and CPTSD manifest itself in our lives? Well, imposter syndrome. There's an internalized belief that success is due to luck. Nothing about ability or talent or gifts or anything like that. It's just due to luck. How else it manifests? We're deceptive. Uh, External factors weigh into everything in these things. Uh, so we have an internalized belief that success is due to luck. That's the imposter syndrome way of looking at success. Someone with CPTSD internalizes the belief that they may be or are unlovable, broken, or inherently flawed. That is some of the manifestations of CPTSD or complex trauma. The person believes themselves to be unlovable, broken, and absolutely flawed. So both groups of people, or some of us have both, obviously, there's an internalized belief system at work that stalls us in our lives. Our reactions to success, as someone with imposter syndrome or CPTSD. Someone with imposter syndrome feels undeserving and worries about being found out. That's the thing all the time. Always worried about being found out. Somebody's going to find out that I'm really not all that I might appear to be. And people with CPTSD, they feel disconnected from achievements and struggle with self-acceptance. That's a tough spot to be in, and it makes success very hard. It's hard to accept. How we react to it is not what you would expect. Emotional effects of imposter syndrome and complex PTSD. Well, imposter syndrome. The emotional effects are fear, anxiety, self-doubt, and mental exhaustion. Think of what that all looks like. You got fear, you got anxiety, you're doubting who you are, and you're just mentally exhausted because you're always afraid of being found out. Somebody's going to know who we really are, and it's all going to fall apart at any given moment. Now, the emotional effects of CPTSD are shame, guilt, fear, emotional flashbacks, fear of others, trusting each other, trusting others. These are all things that are very realistic and very hard to deal with a lot of times. Shame in particular, you notice that's at the top of the list. Many people with CPTSD feel a strong sense of shame, and this stands in the way of so much. So, when you look at all that's going on with these two significant things, imposter syndrome and CPTSD, there's a lot of similarities, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot to deal with. I just wanted to share this today. It may not be the best episode I've done, may not be the clearest, but hopefully it helps you to understand if you're dealing with CPTSD, you're probably going to be dealing with imposter syndrome as well. Because those of us with CPTSD just have such low expectations of ourselves, such a low view of ourselves, that we have a tendency to deal with imposter syndrome quite a bit. So think back to that first slide with the two pieces coming together and how that looks and what's going on there. This is what it's like to try to have a full and successful life when you have CPTSD. You're not only dealing with all the symptoms of CPTSD, you end up dealing with the symptoms of imposter syndrome. And that makes life pretty difficult at times. But if we can recognize what's going on, we can start to deal with the symptoms of both issues. And it's going to be an ongoing project for sure, no matter what way you look at it. You can't just say, I'm not going to be this way anymore. No, it takes work, and it's worth the effort. And I would encourage you to do so. Well, that's what I wanted to share here in episode 16. Thank you for watching. Lord willing, we'll be back together a little sooner than this last time. God bless and take care.